Okay, well, welcome to everyone on this webinar and watching on Facebook Live. I'm David Uy, Executive Director of the Chinese American Museum, DC. We're the first and only museum in our nation's capital dedicated to the Chinese American story. So welcome to the yin and yang of multi-generational living and caregiving, brought to you by the generous support of AARP. So tonight, we're gonna have a really great discussion about multi-generational living and caregiving from two Chinese American families. Certainly, the Asian American community is steeped in a tradition of filial piety, a reverence and duty to parents and grandparents. But I think it'll be interesting to discuss how these cultural traditions shape today's multi-generational households. So, after a year like 2020, how blessed are we, those that can, be with their extended family at this time. So, to lead this conversation, I am so pleased to welcome Mei Fong. Mei Fong is Chief Communications Officer at Human Rights Watch. She leads that organization's unwavering media outreach, and she was previously Director of Communications and Strategy at the Center for Public Integrity. Prior to that, she was a Wall Street Journal correspondent, and she won a shared Pulitzer for her coverage on China. I don't know why we didn't lead with that when you win a Pulitzer. She's the author of One Child, the Story of China's Most Radical Experiment, which won a nonfiction award for from the American Society of Journalists and Authors. Foreign Policy magazine listed her on the top 50 list of US-China influencers. And Mei is a graduate of the National University of Singapore, and she holds a master's in international affairs from Columbia University. She speaks Bahasa Indonesia, Mandarin, and Cantonese. So welcome.
Hi, thank you for the long introduction, David. I'm so sorry to make you go through that.
No, it's well deserved.
I'm actually very excited to introduce the rest of the panelists here, but I know that we have so much, that we want to talk about that I will propose not to read the entire biographies of everyone on the list, which I think we can include after this, right, Louisa, in more lengthy format, but I will introduce this the way we would be, say, at a dinner party a little bit with some salient facts, and then we can read more of the bios after that, and we can proceed straight into our discussions and our interesting stories of how we all came to live in multi-generational households. I will start first by introducing my father-in-law, Marshall, and my mother-in-law, June. So Marshall, my father-in-law, was for many years at the National Science Foundation, where he served as division director in charge of engineering projects. He has a PhD in chemical engineering and has won many awards. And so I devoutly hope my children at least get that genetic mix brain-wise. My mother-in-law, June, is one of the sweetest women I know, and she has worked many years as a librarian before, raising a family. And after she raised a family, she was a bilingual counselor for the county school systems and language interpreter. And Yoksa Reynolds, whom I'm going to introduce here, and I know also as well, was born in Singapore, right next to where I grew up in Malaysia, where we have many, many lovely meals, gorgeous meals. And she came to the US for graduate studies, and she has had her whole entire career in higher ed, including working as a very prestigious VP for finance at Cornell University. And she's, of course, been very active in all her professional association activities. And a few years ago, after retirement, she and her husband, Bruce, moved to a three-generation household by invitation from her daughter, Kaki. Catherine and James, welcome also. Kaki, I have known for many years as a very distinguished journalist and writer. who has written a great deal about, particularly on the issue of children's education. She is an author of a best-selling book called The Good News, The Good News, yes, The Good News About Bad Behavior, which was actually based on one of the most read articles in Mother Jones. I think the most well-read article in Mother Jones. She's also an MIT Knight Science Journalism Fellow, has written many, many articles in Atlantic, Mother Jones, New York Times, and Washington Post. And she's also a certified parent educator. So please direct all questions on childhood education to her. And next to her is James Lewis, who is going to be the representative of the third generation. So James, be sure to be frank on what the aspects of multi-generational living are like for us. James is a rising senior at Georgetown Day School. He plays the bass guitar, he enjoys gardening, helps with theater tech, and he is now going to be a fellow at the GDS Institute this summer. Way to go, James. And in his free time, he tutors and babysits and plays with his dog. So welcome everyone to this discussion on multi-generational living. I think it would be, before we start in our stories, I think it's a good idea to preface the introduction by talking a little bit about the context in which we are living in right now. Our two families, of course, embarked upon multi-generational living before COVID and the pandemic hit. But clearly, interest in this particular form of living has shot up during the pandemic. So many families are realizing how nice it is in a way to be together, or maybe not, some of them realizing not so nice aspects, but we certainly found it to be nice to be together during this period where grandparents, for example, were isolated for many months, possibly even a year from seeing family contact with, say, their grandchildren, for example. In terms of statistics, multi-generational living as defined several ways. The most common way is the three-generation household like ours. There's families that are raised by the grand families, they call them, where the grandparents are the head of the households. There is also the boomerang household, where adult children go back to live with their parents. So these are all several definitions of it. It is a growing trend. It's particularly 1 in 5 Americans, I believe, and this was pre-COVID statistics. And according to Pew, at least about a third of those families are Asian American families do multi-generational living. I'm saying it way too fast. A third. So we are by far the largest ethnic group, but very close behind it, Hispanics, 27%, and Blacks, 26%. That's compared to only about 16% of white households. So it's definitely a thing I think people of color are not doing. And maybe the first question we might want to ask is why that might be so. And maybe in context of that, we might talk about how we came to do it ourselves. So maybe we should start first with Kaki and Yok-san. What made you decide to do this multi-generational living? What prompted you into this?
Well, my version of the story is that Brian, my son-in-law, one day out of the blue asked, what are your retirement plans? Have you started thinking? And we were nowhere near thinking about it.
And then what happened?
Well, my response was, let me think about that. We really do enjoy Charlottesville. Bruce and I were in Charlottesville at the time. But we would really like to be closer to the grandchildren. We were driving every other week, 3 hours each way to see, first of all, James, and then Ava was born. And then he came back a little bit later and said, would you like to live with us? We're thinking about moving, and we could find a place that would be suitable for both families.
Did you have any reservations?
Any what?
Any reservations?
No, not at all. I asked Bruce this morning on his way out the door, I said, so why did we decide to do this? And he turned to me and he said, I love my grandchildren.
How about you, Kaki?
That's so interesting to hear your version. So my memory is that you were driving up every weekend from Charlottesville, and Dad took early retirement and was spending a lot of time when Jamie was a baby, sometimes a week at a time up here. And we were thinking about maybe you would move up to Maryland and buy a house, maybe nearby in the same school district. And then we looked at housing prices, and it's really expensive in Montgomery County to buy, or in DC, you know, to buy a second single family home. I don't know if you remember, Mom, we were living in a townhome, and we looked at there was some apartments near the townhome, and even those were so expensive that Brian and I said, well, why don't we just buy a bigger house with more room, and then your parents can live with us. So we looked for the house that we're in now with an eye to having a bedroom, a walkout bedroom, you know, or bedroom plus, you know, bathroom. And we've just found a beautiful home that has a full, you know, basement level that has, you know, a walkout deck. And then of course you and Dad renovated it, which made it even nicer. So,
well, there's some consistency in Australia.
yeah, I think it was a combination of they were already providing so much childcare that we thought it might be convenient if they didn't have to drive so far to do it.
And you live in a beautiful home where there's a sort of a you know, a flat below for the grandparents, which, you know, and then you guys live in a separate dwelling, but it's all within one building, right?
Right. And I said to when Brian and I were thinking about this, we thought we can make this work if we have a separate front door, so he doesn't trip over my dad's shoes every time he walks in the door, and a separate kitchen. So my mom can have her own domain for her kitchen and our kitchen. And I think those two things have been really helpful. It helps us to think about being two households that are living side by side as opposed to one big household.
Well, that's a great story. In our case, it's a little bit different because we are one big household with shared kitchen facilities and all that. And from my point of view, I think it works very well because I am not at all domestic. And so the kitchen is very much my mother-in-law, June's domain. But Mom and Dad, do you want to tell a story of how we got together?
Yeah, actually, during much of my childhood, I grew up in a multi-generation environment. My mom came from a large family with a large residence in Hong Kong, which was under British rule at the time. So during the Sino-Japanese War and the Chinese Civil War, it provided a refuge for a lot of relatives. So I grew up with the notion that family is a protection, and kids can always come home to stay, not just to visit. So fast forward to early 90s, when our youngest went to college. Now, most empty nesters downsized because apparently they didn't plan on having their children to come home with their future family for a visit for any length of time, like vacations. But we look ahead and upsize instead. And because we wanted all our 3 children and their families to come home during vacations with adequate room and facilities for them to accommodate them without having to send them to hotels. So it worked out well, and we have enjoyed numerous happy family gatherings for the past 25 years now. Well, then 9 years ago, we got a bonus, so to speak, and I'll let June tell you about that bonus.
Okay, also out of the blue, one day I got a telephone call from Mei, our lovely daughter-in-law. And she called me and said, Mom, now we have a chance to move to Washington, to change job and move to Washington. Would you like to have us living with you? Right away, I say, yes, but this is not me. Usually whenever we have a big decision like that, I will always say, yeah, we'll think about it and I'll get back to you. But with this, I did not even ask him. I said yes right away, because I know that this is his dream. All the time he was wishing that with a big house, somebody will come home. That's why we have them coming home. And then, yeah, just a few months later, they all came home with a nanny, with the set of twin boys at that time. They were only 2 years old. And then also a dog they brought back from Beijing, a stray dog from Beijing, which is also a first. My house has never had any dog or cat enter the family, not ever, because our son was very, very allergic. But even with the dog, I say yes, because I know that's part of the family. If I say no, they won't come back. So we enjoy the Eddie, the little dog here, very, very much. And this is our 9th year together. And it's been working very well. It's so funny. A good friend of ours who lives out of town, their first grandchild was born and then raised here. So every time they come home to see this grandchild, they have to stay in the hotel and then make an appointment with the daughter-in-law, because the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law do not get along very well. So one time when we were having dinner together, this good friend of ours asked me, so, are you still talking to Mei? Are you two still talking? Oh, I laugh and say, of course we're still talking to each other. Now we're not only talking to each other, we're still hugging each other, we're still holding hands, we're saying, I love you. Everything worked out very well so far. And then we are just looking forward to a long time together.
Well, thank you for that, Mommy. I owe you a biscuit after this. But I mean, for my story, my aspect of it, you know, I grew up in Asia, but actually it's kind of strange because my experience in Asia showed me that actually multi-generational living was actually falling out of mode. You know, the time when my father-in-law talked about multi-generational living was sort of pre-war or during war times. You know, I had spent years in China covering, you know, all sorts of issues there. And that one of the things that got me really interested in covering the one-child policy was the issue of the breakdown and the erosion of the family structure that result from that, you know. And you know, I saw, for example, and part of it was also urbanization as China was, you know, growing up from, you know, there was this big move away from a lot of rural areas to urban areas as the economy became more, you know, modernized and industrialized. So as a result of that, I would constantly see whenever I went to rural areas that there were very many older families, grandparents, and sometimes the grandchildren as well, because the parents would have to move out and work and find work in the cities, and they would leave the children. And it struck me as a very lonely situation, you know, for a lot of grandparents. And there were quite a lot of horror stories involved in that, you know, grandparents not knowing how to cope with grandchildren, and then, you know, the children never seeing their parents more than just once a year. And I just sort of felt like that was not the way I wanted to raise my children. I wanted my children to know their grandparents. I myself never knew my grandparents very well. I only saw them maybe once a year. And I didn't have very good memories of my grandparents growing up. My grandmother used to pinch us, you know, in the stomach because we were girls and she liked boys, a very traditional Chinese family. So I didn't have all these rosy views of multi-generational, but I did see a view, a way that we could do this that would make sense. And, you know, part of it is really only dependent on our personalities. You know, my mother-in-law, as you can clearly see, is a warm and loving person. And so is my father-in-law. And I just wanted my children to know more of that. But, you know, it's kind of interesting in a way that my reporting on my work sort of grounded me to think about that issue. And I'm kind of curious, Kaki, because you've written a lot about, you know, family and parenting and children. And I'm wondering how that transfers into your thoughts and thinking on the multi-generational living aspect. Did it shape it in any way?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, certainly I started off as a business journalist. And so I covered a lot of workplace, personal finance, sort of work-life balance issues. And so even before I had kids, I was just very aware that there is a huge work-life conflict in the US because we have such poor childcare supports, you know, and it's very expensive. You know, daycare is very expensive. So I think going into having kids, I knew that that was going to be a challenge, both having the time, you know, between Brian and I both working and being able to pay for childcare. So I sort of knew that this would be an issue where I would like more support. So I think it was more from a practical logistics standpoint that that made me feel that it made sense to all live together. But you know, what Marshall and June were saying really resonated with me as well, because when I grew up, you know, my grandmother lived with us for some time because she was coming from Singapore. So, you know, she wasn't going to live somewhere else, but it would be months at a time. And then she lived for years with my uncle, and then she ended her life living with my aunt. So I think it was just very common for us to think, of course, we would have our grandparents nearby. And even my dad's parents, whom we did see maybe 3 or 4 times a year, what Marcia was saying about the big family, you know, I always wanted to have, I grew up with cousins, you know, over holidays, spending a lot of times with cousins. So I wanted that same big family, you know, everyone under one roof experience. So I think that made a lot of sense to me. And then the only other thing I would say, I mean, obviously the more, all the research on parenting and child rearing shows the more loving, caring adults in your child's life, the better. So I really, you know, wanted them to have that close relationship with their grandparents, and this seemed a really efficient way to do it.
Maybe this is a really good point to segue into asking James how he feels about having been raised in a multi-generational household and whether or not he appreciates being surrounded by so many. What do you think, James? How's your experience been like?
Well, I mean, I've really enjoyed having my grandparents around a lot. I think it's especially relevant this year because of the pandemic, as you mentioned, Mei. Because like a lot of my friends didn't see their grandparents all year, and I feel very fortunate to have spent basically all year with my grandparents. So that was wonderful. And then also I think it like one thing that I really remember from like when I was little was walking to school with my grandfather every morning. So it was like, you know, if my parents couldn't walk us to school, then my grandfather would do that, and they'd, you know, trade off and do different things. And that's where I got all of my songs from. He used to make us sing songs on the walks in the morning and give us poems to read while we were walking, and give us little life lesson talks about the secrets of life.
What is the secret of life? Can you let us know right now? This is really, really.
Somehow we never got to that.
Well, that's great. What about you, Yoksan? I mean, I think part of this is, I think we all agree, is the raising with memories, you know, and building of that. What are some of your particular special treasured memories about, you know, living and being in close proximity with your grandchildren?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that there were certainly expectations that we would have close relationships with the grandchildren and with Kathy and Brian. And there would be some things we'd do together and some things we would do separately. And the benefits that people often think about being able to help with childcare when the kids are younger. And then as we age, the grandparents age, it would be so nice to have a caregiver or a care manager right there on site. But I think what really I didn't expect, where there were some challenges and some benefits. So for example, I thought long and hard about the fact that with 4 adults hovering over 2 children, the children could easily get coddled. But I didn't want to get them into a situation where they forgot to pack their lunch or forgot to pack their homework, and they call, and then there we are, one of us will run over. And that's not good for kids. That's my child rearing philosophy. But so what I found instead was we were able to manage that because my daughter, Kaki, who is full of wisdom, found a protocol for us to manage that last minute call for service. But one thing that I certainly did not expect was that because the grandparents were in proximity, that the children actually, I think in some situations, were put in position of taking on adult responsibility long before their peers. And I'm thinking in particular of 2 situations, one where Jamie was, one where I tripped and I fell flat on my face. And Jamie was the only other person there. And the other situation was when my husband fainted after surgery, and Jamie was the only person there. And both of us said, oh, no, that's okay, we can go on. And Jamie, in his very calm voice, I think he must have been 13 at the time, said, "Mom, you have blood on your face." And I had no idea. And then he went for help. And so I think when thinking back, I think it's just amazing that Jamie was put in that situation and rose to the occasion.
Wow, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that with us, Yoksan. I only hope my children, who are now both 11, will be in that, position of great maturity at some point with their grandparents. I mean, one of my biggest fears is, at 11, little boys, they leave all their toys around, their Lego sets and everything. And it's a constant fear of mine that, they will, June and Marshall will trip over these things and break something. So there's a constant, sort of framework in my mind, like, you got to be careful, don't leave all this stuff around and all that. But, I'd be curious. I mean, June, Marshall, what do you think are some of the benefits or unexpected benefits of a close proximity with grandchildren? Are they too coddled? Are ours too coddled because they have, 4 adults hovering over them?
Actually, it's funny. The thing that I enjoy is listening to their noise. And you keep on telling them, keep quiet, don't bother Yeye and grandmommy. I sit in my study and see what's going on and hear what's going on outside. And that really is a treat. Instead of a house being very silent, just the 2 of us, because we are not great talkers. So having children, the boys' noise outside is a treat for me, so to speak, as long as it's not fighting noise. And they do make some very joyful noise.
What about you, Mommy? What do you think?
Well, I think one of the reasons that we are successful in co-living together is that we keep our, we keep our distance. We still, I like you, the small family, to have your own way of teaching, your own way of, living. You have your own rules. Now, as we move in, we have a home rule on the wall. So we always have that. And I think it's important that you, as parents, you do the teaching, the discipline, and so forth. So we do not interfere with your family. I think that's one of the reasons. So we keep our, keep our separate households. Although we are under one roof. Well, so in the morning, that before they go to school and so forth, I usually don't bother at all, because I think they are making their own memories as a family. This is very, very important. And then on weekends too, we have our very separate social lives. Now, every Friday they have their movie night, their fried chicken night, and so forth. And then we have our own social life. So at least for the time being, we are both driving. We have a lot of friends and church activities. So it worked out very well. But also, we really enjoy the children. We really don't mind the noise. In the car, sometimes we still record some of the conversation in the car. Sometimes they were fighting, but a lot of times they are so much fun. And you should come to our dinner. At least we have dinner 4 times a week together. And then you better be a very good Jeopardy player, because we get all kinds of questions at dinner time. There are all kinds of discussions. They know so much more. I'm the worst of all. So really, it's just a wonderful time together and then separate.
Well, that's right. That's one of the things my kids do with the grandparents. Is their special thing is they like to watch Jeopardy together with their grandparents. Yeah. Although I think they've now migrated to watching, was it America's Got Talent together? But I should take a moment to interject here at this point. If anybody's got any questions on this, please feel free to send them to the Q&A portion of this, or raise your hand, or in any way, we'll certainly try and get to that. But maybe we're presenting too rosy a view of things, I mean, there must be some, not so great portions about multi-generational living, some stresses or thoughts on that front, that I think anybody contemplating or thinking about it might want to consider as well. And maybe this is something we should, in all fairness, raise. Well, what do you think? Kaki, Yoksan, any thoughts on that, we aren't all the Brady Bunch of Walton, Walton's Mountain, are we?
Mom, do you want to go first, or?
I can go first.
Ooh.
So I think that, and June referred to it, that setting the guidelines are very important. One issue is on privacy. And I think that Kaki early on said we should be thinking about ourselves as neighbors who happen to be related, close neighbors, but we should respect our boundaries, and we wouldn't go and march into your neighbor's house without giving any advance notice. So we always try to do that. I think that's really worked. The second thing I'll say is we recognized early on that the four of us adults needed to have the same parenting philosophy. We needed to be on the same page. We didn't want to have the children shopping for the right answers to one of the adults. And Kaki and Brian were taking a parenting course at the time, and they recommended that we read the textbook. So we did more than that. We attended the parenting course. That was wonderful. And we learned about the 4 types of misbehaviors and how you need to respond to each one differently.
Right. Yeah. No, I really am so grateful. My parents are such committed and engaged grandparents. And I do think that is maybe one of the downsides for our situation, is that they have had to have more discipline and sort of limit setting interactions with our kids because they're here. And so if it's time to turn off the TV and go to bed and they're babysitting, they have to be that disciplinarian, whereas grandparents who weren't living here might only have the interactions where they show up with pockets full of candy, and then every time you see their grandparents, it's only it's only a treat. So I think that they've taken on a lot of the burden of the day-to-day, right? The less enjoyable parts of child rearing. But I hope that it's worth it, because I do think a lot of those, special memories are some of those quiet times when you're just, making dinner together, walking to school together. And I do think, like June was saying, we try to set, what are the days we're having dinner together? What are the days we're having dinner separately? And one of my friends, when my parents renovated the basement apartment and they put a door, sort of connecting door between our stairs and their apartment, a friend got a sign that says, grandchildren welcome. Parents by invitation only. And that's the sign on their door. So I always knock, when I'm going in, and Brian is better at this than I am, but I try not to rely on my mom's fridge if I run out of milk, or, sort of really to be respectful of each other's separate households. One of the things I had to get over, and I think it's been a wonderful journey, is I realized when my parents moved in with us, then my neighbors were their neighbors, and they get to know my kids' friends and my kids' friends' parents, who are often my friends and neighbors. And there's this part of me that's still a 15-year-old girl who's a little embarrassed of her parents, right? And I had to just get over that and say, well, my dad's gonna go out in his bathrobe to get the paper in the morning, and my neighbors might see him, and that's okay, right? I think it's a small price to pay, but it's one of those things. When I was a kid, I was always so embarrassed when he would, be out in his bathrobe in public. So sorry, Dad, that's embarrassing. Just little things like that, where I just really had to grow up, and say, well, my dad is not a reflection on me. I love him, and I really value his participation in my life, and so he's going to have relationships with my neighbors that are independent of me, and he may say things that I wouldn't have wanted him to share, but it's okay. So I think that really the privacy, the boundaries, and just accepting that there are going to be things that maybe you would have handled a little bit differently as a parent than the grandparent, and that's okay.
Well, I certainly agree with you on the boundaries front, and I hope we try to observe it too in my house. So I mean, two things I think I've thought of as you were bringing this up was, somebody had once said to me something like, you know, the surest way to turn your in-laws into outlaws is to treat them like unpaid babysitters. So I think we have, especially when they were younger, tried to be very mindful of that, because especially for us, twins are a real handful, especially when they're little, and you know, so we were always very careful to try and, you know, get babysitters instead and pay for them, and and not expect our grandparents to just, you know, just be willy-nilly available without asking ahead of time. The other issue I think for boundary setting, which I appreciate very much from my in-laws, is that the fact is they are very devout Christians. However, I am not. I don't even know what I am. I was raised a Buddhist. I went to a missionary school. I am consequently all mixed up, but they have not tried to sort of impose their beliefs on me, and I really respect that, and I really appreciate that in their behalf. So, you know, even though we all live in the same household, and I'm sure there are times when they would love to tell me something, that we have all been very respectful of that, and I really appreciate it. But June and Marshall, I'm curious, what do you think are some of the you know, perhaps less savory parts of multi-generational things that, you know, anybody contemplating this should think about very carefully?
I think it's very important that I let you be the parent, the discipline, the growing up to be your responsibility. So in Chinese, we have a saying that you do not teach skipping a generation. So you are the parents, so you do all the discipline. So even at the table, even if when they are not minding and then you are disciplining, we just keep our mouth shut. We don't say a word, because that's your way of teaching. I think to me, that's very, very important. Yeah, we let you do the cooking. And then also the babysitting too. Yeah, you know that from the very beginning, I say I do not babysit anymore. Now I brought up 3 children, and then these little babies I cannot handle. So with 6 grandchildren, I never babysit when they were very little. So they came back to live with us with a live-in nanny. They brought home a live-in nanny until the teens were 3.5, until they're old enough to go to nursery school. Then the nanny left. But before school age, I really did not babysit. After that, of course, it's much, much easier. And still, they are very considerate. If they are going to be out long, then they will always hire a babysitter so that we don't have to stay up just for them. So it is just a different take. I think we have so much love in this family that we can just get along so well. Yeah.
You know, I'm going to move this discussion a little bit to the wider consequences of, you know, more on a national level in a second, but I'm just going to take a minute to remind folks that in about a few minutes or so, we can open it up to questions if they want. So just, you know, either ping them in or raise your hand or put the questions you would like in your Q&A. But, you know, one of the questions that had occurred to me as I was thinking about this was, you know, we are, of course, holding this talk wonderfully, generously hosted by the Chinese American Museum of DC. And this is assumed in some sense that this is a very ethnic thing, you know, multi-generational living. But, you know, in my research on this, very preliminary, insofar as this is International Longevity Center that has noted there's actually a decline in multi-generational living elsewhere. And this was all pre-COVID, mind you, because COVID was a little unusual. Everywhere else, because of increased prosperity, people are more able to afford a home. So elsewhere in this world, except America, there has actually been a decline. America is the one sort of standout. So in some sense, my question to you is this actually an Asian thing, or is this actually an American thing, or maybe an American Asian thing, Asian American thing? It's my question. So what do you think?
I think it's more of an American thing, because when we came to America, we realized that, wow, by 18, you better leave home. Otherwise, it's losing faith if you are not independent and then you stay home. But to Chinese, most Asians, before you get married, you always stay home. You do not leave home until you get married. So in a way, this is a very Asian thing. And then the Western civilization has a big influence on the other countries now. That's why the young people, they want to learn from America, and then they don't want to they stay home anymore.
I think it's a plot of the real estate people to get people to buy more houses, to have more, just to live separately.
Well, it is true that, you know, one of the things that I think I noticed post-war generation in America, that, you know, during the war times, there was this rise in feminine movements, right? You know, women were working out in factories and earning their own money for the very first time. But then when men came back from the war, there was this big push towards creating this sort of idealized world where it's like Leave It to Beaver, June Cleaver at home. And it was, as you say, probably, I suspect, you sell more houses if everybody's buying more houses and more Sunbeam cars and more, all these things to have lots and lots of single family households, right? From an economic perspective. But now, I mean, I think we're at a different stage because I think economics, again, is driving this interest in multi-generational household around Americans. One of the big things that we've talked about is, especially as working mothers, Kaki and I have found, there is very little institutional structure to support working families or working mothers in particular, relative to almost every other wealthy nation out there, right? I mean, Kaki, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's ridiculous how, that we don't have preschool, universal preschool, right? Or childcare or longer maternity and paternity leaves. So many of my friends at 6 weeks postpartum go back to work. Right. And so, we paid a lot of money for daycare. Actually, I have a stepdaughter who's 28. And when Ava, my youngest, got out of daycare, it was almost exactly when Samantha went to college. And it was about the same cost. Right. So when people said, oh my gosh, it's so expensive, I'm like, 2 kids in daycare, it's pretty similar. So I think that's definitely going to be driving it. Rising housing costs make it much more practical to just have more earners, right, under one roof. And I would also say, that it's nice to have the extra support. The culture around schools, in my opinion, is very unfriendly to working parents. They'll sort of announce something that needs to be done at the school in an afternoon, or like a recital or something where the parents need to show up. And it just was so much easier the whole time my kids were small when there were 4 of us. So there are 4 schedules that could be disruptive for an early pickup or a sick kid, or, all the things that working families deal with all the time. I really feel so grateful because I don't know how you do it with only 2 parents or only 1 parent, right? And 1 adult in the house. It's really, we don't have the social safety net that certainly European countries or Canada has for working families.
I see a really interesting question from Jenaline in the audience, which is, how would you handle when your parents, or our parents, rather, in that case of questions, need assisted living and skilled nursing facilities? It's a tough question, that one. I'm not sure I figured that one out. And what would you all like to answer on this and share your thoughts? So Kaki, you want to jump in first, or Yok-san?
Well, I will say, my mom, when we were first talking about doing this and looking for a house, I wish she was so excited about it. And then I remember at one point, she said, oh, but you realize we're not going to be as active and able-bodied as we are now, forever. And I said, yeah, Mom, I had that in mind, that, it would be nice to have you close, as you need more support and that sort of thing. But Mom, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say that we have thought about it a little bit, and we thought about buying insurance, but we don't think that makes sense at our age. And the model that we would follow is the one that my in-laws did when they were at the point where they could not walk by themselves. They had to be assisted, and that was that they had in-house help. So I think that we very much think that is certainly an option in our future. Assisted living, we have had friends who moved into not assisted living so much as group living. That's another option.
I think the nice thing for me is that my parents, now are in the same community that I am. They have friendships and ties and supports in this community. So it's not like I would, if the time came that they needed assisted, living facility, that we would be moving them across country and they'd be in a new place where they didn't know anyone. You know, I think that happens often. And I think this is a much easier, it would be a much easier transition, right?
Yeah, I mean, from my end of things, I mean, yeah, you know, I two parts of it I was thinking about. One was, in some sense, as you mentioned, what I and hope will happen in the future is that, you know, as the children grow up, my children, that they will be more able to help and assist with, you know, with their grandparents in their needs, especially as they're older and more mature. And not only will they be more able, but they will also be more willing, because they have grown up with their grandparents. And it's not just a question of duty, but a question of love, that, you know, that will be the case. And I certainly saw about this a lot, especially with COVID. Grandparents were in, you know, care facilities where, you know, people were, you know, where people were dying in nursing homes. And I was, you know, very acutely grateful that our family was not subject to these kinds of concerns and fears, and you know, that they were with us and we could, you know, all take care of each other. But June, Marshall, what are your thoughts about this issue?
What happens so much. I hope we can stay in this house and won't bother people too much, bother you too much. Like my mother lived to 104 years old. She just take good care of herself until the very end. That's why we are trying to keep in good health, keep well, so that in the future, hopefully we don't have to bother you too much. But if the time comes that we cannot take care of ourselves and for you to take care of us, of course we should go somewhere where we'll be taken care of instead of bothering you. That's my.
I'm not really so much in favor. I think, you know, I mean, I try to apply the same principles as I would apply to myself, and what would be, you know, a bountiful help, you know, a good way of living, basically. So I think, you know, in that sense, it does feel like it's very foreign and different and very Americanized to die isolated and alone in a hospital somewhere and away from your loved ones. That's certainly not something I would want and wish for myself. And frankly, that was something I was writing a lot about when I was in China, because they have this huge aging population and a very abbreviated small working age population to take care of their elders under the one-child policy. That situation is increasingly becoming very evident and helpful. I mean, China has actually even instituted a law requiring children to take care of their parents. Now, not that it's been enforced, but they've instituted a law because that's become an issue. And I never like us to have arrived at that stage. But, you know, another question that has occurred is that has actually surfaced privately on this issue is the issue of finances. How do you handle your finances in a multi-generational household? Kaki, you've written a lot about personal finance, and now, you know, how have you guys tackled this?
Oh, that's a good question. We had all these good plans going into it, where I think my parents were going to pay a quarter of the utilities, and the first few years they would write us a check, and then but now I think we're just very sloppy, and whoever's going to the store gets groceries for everyone. And you know, we pay the mortgage and they pay a lot of the gardening and home repair. So I don't know, we probably were better organized about it 12 years ago. Mom, what do you think?
Well, I think we had an initial discussion about it, and you and Brian absolutely refused to take rent from us. So then we try to pay whatever we can. But you're right, we've been very sloppy about it, and we don't seem to be too worried about it. I think it works.
Yeah, I think sloppy is the right policy.
Yeah.
We don't really care.
No.
In fact, I think Andrew and Mei pay for the gas and the electricity. We pay for the water and the taxes and so forth. We are, of course, mortgage free right now. And then as far as going to the grocery, we never bother to come home and say, let's split this bill.
Never.
In fact, we we get a bonus because that helps us to reach the $100 limit that we can get a rebate from the grocery store. So
Which
no
grocery
problem
store is
with
that?
Yeah, that's Teeter, Harry's
Teeter, you do
Teeter.
buy 100, you got $20 off.
Yeah, and then when we go to restaurant, we still fight over the check.
Yeah.
People are really funny about that.
And then
so-
during the COVID, because they did most of the shopping, so we wrote them checks. I wrote several times. They didn't even cash it.
Yeah.
So
Sounds
very
familiar.
happy, but,
So one good thing is that our family is not too money oriented.
no,
Well, none of us is.
Yes.
So we probably don't even know how much money we have.
We're despoiling the traditional stereotype of Asians. Okay. This is a question for Yok-san. Is individual space essential for success in multi-generational homes?
Well, that's a very good question. I often think that I could probably share the same space with the upstairs family, and that might make things easier. But I think it actually complicates things. I love having my own kitchen. It really was my one requirement. I don't think I would mind sharing living space, but I needed my own kitchen. I just couldn't think about how 6 of us would be dealing with one another in the kitchen and trying to keep out of each other's way. So for me, the kitchen is a separate space that I need, and bathroom too, of course, and bedroom.
Mommy, any thoughts about personal space issue?
Well, because we don't eat together every meal, so far I think it works out fine. But on weekends, you guys use the kitchen, and then we don't fight over the kitchen at all. It's
So how do you?
like a college? What do you call that? College dorm. Whoever uses the kitchen is there. So we don't schedule 3 meals a day, what time and so forth. We feel very free. Whoever is there, whoever wants to eat can eat. But dinner we have it together. But breakfast and lunch is all up to you. What do you think?
Well, I like the term college dorm in this. I still feel like I'm very college dormy. I'm like eating ramen in the middle of the night when I'm on a deadline.
Right, that's right.
There's one good question I think is going to be kind of funny. Helen asks, she says, one advantage I can think of is that grandchildren have a better chance to practice Chinese. Have you found this to be true in your home? 怎么样啊？还可以吗？
Not
you know,
in this household. Although I've been a Chinese teacher for many years, and they are also in the Chinese immersion program. But still, because they know that I can speak English, they will not answer me in Chinese. Even though I speak to them in Chinese, a lot of times they do not answer me in Chinese. So I don't think it's working out that well.
Yeah, June does better. I'm no help at all.
Jamie, do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, so I've been learning Chinese for 2 years now in high school. So sometimes I talk to my grandmother in Chinese, but I don't know a lot of words. So I know like the basics. We can chat a little bit, but definitely it's helpful for learning like words that I think sometimes the books that I'm learning in school don't have like updated words that you'd actually use in conversation. So it's definitely helpful to hear like words that are actually used.
Well, the difficulty is I don't know simplified characters. So, and that's all you guys learn in school now. So I have to impute. How about you guys, Marshall and June? Do you do simplified characters or traditional characters?
It's very easy. Just read the paper more and more, and then I just get used to them now. Yes. And then at this household, we have Cantonese, Mandarin, and English all mixed up here. So the grandchildren will know how to do a little Cantonese, like Xiu Mai, Ta Xiu, and so forth.
You know that.
爷爷食饭. They will always say, 爷爷, come and eat. 爷爷食饭. 快啲, hurry up, hurry up.
they also know 快仔.
Yeah, and then I speak Cantonese with Mei and with June.
And then I speak Cantonese with my son, Andrew, And so, and I also speak to Mei in English
No,
and Cantonese.
You speak Mandarin. So.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to end you, I speak Mandarin. Yes.
So I grew up in a Cantonese speaking household but very kitchen Cantonese. And I went to a school in Malaysia where Bahasa was the national language of instruction and English was second. So we didn't really learn any Mandarin. So when I was sent by my company, the Wall Street Journal, to go to China in Beijing, there was expectation, especially with this phase, that you would speak Mandarin. So it was quite a bit struggle for me to pick up Mandarin. Fortunately, having, some Cantonese, made a little bit easier, but it was difficult. So when I had my children, I was like, man, it would be so much easier if they learn this language from birth, therefore, it's going to come so naturally. So that was certainly part of my consideration when we were living with grandparents. I was like, they would soak it all in. But it's very hard to raise multilingual children in America. So we had to make all sorts of extra, provisions. We send the children for after school Chinese, at least we used to before COVID and all this thing got derailed, just to sort of supplement all that. And we were much more better about speaking to them in Mandarin when they were little children. My nanny was only spoke to them in Chinese, but as they grow up more and more, it's harder. So I would not say that we found it to be considerably useful. I think it's helpful to some extent, but we still need to boost it up. And COVID is definitely going to set back on that one. This is another interesting question for you and me, Kaki. How do you manage expectations for your children regarding independence, especially in the US culture, with significant ages of 18 and or 21? How has your view of independence shifted or not, living multi-generationally?
That's a really interesting question. I remember once Ava was talking about how when she grows up, she's going to move into our bedroom, and then we will go downstairs in the basement to mom and dad's apartment. So we have had to tell people that it's not just this natural progression where you inherit the house at 25 or whatever she was thinking. But my kids are very independent. I think that we have really, as my mom said, made it a priority that, and I think they understand, we expect that they will be able to support themselves at 18, or well, I guess when they graduate from college, they'll be out of the house at 18, they'll be supporting themselves in their 20s. And my stepdaughter, actually she moved in with us when she moved to this area from Boston, and after a year, she wanted her own apartment, so she moved out. And I think in an American culture, there's a big drive for wanting to be on your own for a little bit, at least. So I would expect that all three kids will want to have the experience of being, independent. And I hope then invite me to come live with them and take care of their kids.
Yeah, I mean, my children are a little bit quite little, so it's quite a long ways off before we even think about them. Oh, let's hope so. Moving off and doing things. But if and when the time comes, I would like them to have done what my husband and I did, which was to have very independent living for a very, very long time, so that when we came to this decision to live together with June and Marshall, we've lived a very full life and not have the feeling that, well, I missed out on something. We've lived in very many different cities and many different households, and moved around quite a bit, and so we're not sort of feeling like we missed out on anything that we never, we've actively had to manage on our own. We have quite often in different cultures and surroundings. So that is the kind of a feeling I would like to have my children have, to feel that it's a choice, not a must. Yeah. And to this other question, which is we are running out, we have only 1 minute left. So I'm going to finish with this one, which I think is really interesting. How do your siblings with children feel about your parents living you? Do they get jealous of the benefits you have? And so that's a good question there. Let's do it quickly as the last question.
Well, my brother is hoping to start a family, and he has claimed my parents for the next 18 years. So he has said that he expects them to move to Shanghai now and take care of babies. I don't know if that's going to work out, Mom, but
don't worry, I'm going to stay here.
Marshall, any thoughts on that? Are the siblings jealous?
No, I don't think so. Not for me. I think the three of them, they got along very well. Whatever is happy, the other always support. I don't think so. And then on that point, I also think that not just for the young people to wait before you live in 3 generations, also for the parents, I think you should wait until you retire, you have traveled enough, you've enjoyed your retirement, and then move in. Then you won't miss out. Otherwise, you will feel that you're just a maid or something. You know, that's why we have empty nested 25 years before we have this. So the best of two worlds.
I think Matthew and Angela are very grateful that Andrew and Mei stay with us, their family, because that will take a lot of worry out of them, knowing that Andrew and Mei are here taking care of us if something happens. So instead of jealousy, I think they are very grateful.
Very grateful. Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we have to wrap this up at 7. Thank you guys for all these wonderful questions. And thank you guys for all these wonderful answers and all these wonderful shared experiences. I'm going to hand this back to David now. David.
Yeah, well, I hate to barge in, and this is such a great conversation. Well, thank you to Mei, June and Marshall, Kaki and James and Yoksan. And I also like to thank Louisa Sorkness, who's program coordinator, who put this event together. And thank you to AARP, whose support made this program possible. So we've put some links in a screen, but I'll tell you what, don't worry about trying to write this down, because there's a lot on that screen. We will be sending a link, or we will send an email to all the registrants for this event, and it'll have this information in it. And as well as we're going to post this recording on our YouTube channel. So if you want to catch any of the information or things that were mentioned, please do so. Mei and Catherine, do you guys have any new projects you'd like to plug before we get on? Are you working on any?
I think Kaki is a very exciting project. Kaki, you want to talk about yours?
Actually, it was just announced today, so your timing is very good.
Oh, good.
I'm going to be, I just received with a colleague of mine a fellowship from Medill's, the Northwestern Journalism School, and the Raj Entrepreneurship Center to launch a center for independent journalists focused on journalists of color. So I'm really excited about that, and looking forward to getting going on that project.
Well, that sounds great.
Congratulations. Very good.
Thank you.
Kaki, that's fantastic news. On my end, I am very busy working with my new job at Human Rights Watch, working to support and encourage the development of human rights all around the world. So that's what I'm doing.
Terrific, terrific. Well, thank you so much for everybody that joined us this evening. And check back on our website soon, because we also sponsored by AARP. We are having a generation to generation short film and essay contest for juniors and seniors in high school and college age students. And we'll be sharing some more information about that. So keep your eye out for that. So thank you, and thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Maggie.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, Marshall. Bye, June.